Good evening and good morning and namaskar to all the participants, panelists who have joined in for the second session of the ZerO-In Conclave, which is focused around the deliberation on the net zero cities, communities, and even grids. So this is now one of the major areas that USAID would be working on, which would take care of all the work that we have done in the energy efficiency, in the renewable energy, in the decarbonization, in the transportation sector, so to say. All this converges. How does it converge? And a whole narrative around net zero cities can be kick-started. That's the objective of this particular session, to get all the experts from the cities, from international organizations, the experts who deal with this on a day-to-day basis, from industry associations, and the cities themselves. They are all here in this panel to deliberate on the net zero cities, and how it would be taken forward, what actions need to be taken for that. So I'm not the expert on this, but I would just like to just set the context that we all know that cities are the major carbon emitters, and with the way the urban populations are set to rise, it's very, very important now to decarbonize buildings through energy efficiency, integrate appliances which are powered by renewable energy sources, scale up renewable energy and energy efficiency with a multi-pronged approach, with policy and regulatory interventions on one side, along with market-driven strategies, which can be championed by municipalities, by utilities, industry associations, development authorities, and the private sector. So we hope that this deliberation today, in the form of a panel discussion with all the experts here, will set the tone and the stage for our work on net zero energy cities. So with that, I would like to invite Nidhi Gupta. She is Assistant Director with Environmental Design Solutions, the implementing partner of the USAID MAITREE program, to give a presentation on setting the context of what net zero cities, communities, and grids are about. So over to you, Nidhi.
Thank you, Apurva. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to all of you, depending on whichever part of the globe you are joining us from. Start with India. India accounts for 2.4% of the world mass. However, it means 15% of the world population. 26% of the urban population was in 1991, and it is projected to contain 42% of the urban population by 2030. As for the last census, we are a country of 518 town cities, of which 53 cities have a population of over 1 million. By 2050, 2,000 to 3,000 additional growth centers are anticipated. The way we designed, built, operated our cities has undergone a major shift. The built form's urban landscape that was inherently climate responsive and low energy consuming, self-sustaining, has changed. With urbanization, the challenges confronting our cities are becoming increasingly complex. As cities grow bigger and bigger, inequality, economic disparity too grows. Urban heat islands, floods, waste management, water scarcity, air pollution, all affect the livability of the city. We are witnessing effects of ever-increasing energy demand that's contributing to the overall emissions. Cities account for 70% of the global carbon emissions as per the World Economic Forum, and for 78% of the global primary energy. The main energy consuming sector within the cities is that of the buildings, transportation, public infrastructure such as stations, airports, water supply, water treatment systems, and lighting networks. In India, buildings account for 34% of the total electricity, majority of this coming from the buildings in cities. Within buildings, cooling, air conditioning itself is 55%. With rising temperatures, growing urban population, access to disposable income, there is an exponential demand on cooling systems. And this is only going to make this percentage higher. So to tackle the building challenge, the building energy demand, the buildings are being designed to move towards net zero. Net zero energy buildings, we all know, are highly energy efficient, extremely low energy in demand, which is met by renewable energy sources. With net zero energy buildings, it obviously comes with the caveat of integrating renewable energy. In highly dense vertical cities, buildings often face constraints to meet this RE requirement. Also, net zero energy buildings push back electricity to the grid whenever they have it in surplus. It's a very inward looking approach. This is not necessarily aligning with the utility challenge. When we shift scales from the building level to a utility level, the challenge is entirely different. In addition to the seasonal peak demands that the utilities were already facing, they are now facing multiple peak demands within the day, which is not addressed by the net zero energy buildings standalone, right? Utilities are also at the same time facing variable loads, such as increasing renewable energy, with the battery storage, EVs coming into play. Therein lies an opportunity for building grid integration, where buildings start playing a role in solving the challenges of the utility and the city energy demands by being first and foremost energy efficient, next flexible, connected, and smart. They are able to shed, shift, and modulate loads based on the requirements of the larger network. They can also generate and store power and offer relief to the utilities, ensuring reliable power. When we shift scales from buildings to utilities to cities, the lens to view challenges and opportunities also change. Conversations are now moving towards buildings as an integral part of the grid and city as large. There is an opportunity to move towards equity and sharing of resources, like, say, the policy for the virtual solar rooftop, which enables buildings to cater to the needs of their neighborhoods. With countries making net zero pledges, working towards reducing carbon emissions of the building stock, transitioning the grid towards digitization, decentralization, and decarbonization, the onus in the end falls on our cities to meet these commitments. Net zero cities can pave the way. There are many examples of different cities making efforts towards integrating solutions that benefit buildings, utilities, and its citizens. I'll take one. Energy efficiency is often spoken in the context of buildings. The Cooling Singapore initiative outlined 80 measures such as vegetation, public mobility, materials and surfaces, energy consumption patterns, urban forms, water, and shading. At a city level, these strategies are in the end strategies of energy efficiency at scale. These not only reduce building cooling requirements, mitigate heat island effect, but also improve outdoor thermal comfort. The cool roofs for cool Delhis is another example. Implemented at scale, school roofs reduce building energy demand, reduce loads on utilities, and better the environment for the city and as a whole. Globally and in India, there are various programs, policies, pilots, action plans that are moving cities towards net zero, be it India's Smart City mission, the Solar City initiatives. Cities of India is participating in the Race to Zero campaign. USDOE's Connected Communities, C40's City Network, and green grading systems. I'd like to end back at where we started. As our towns are continuing to grow into cities as we speak. Integrated policies, metrics, pilots, schemes, roadmaps, action plans are need of the hour for a building great cities ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. With that, I would now like to invite Zachary Michael Berzola from the Sustainable Design Lab MIT. Zachary's current work is focused in helping communities meet their greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals through energy efficiency and renewable energy technology pathway modeling at the urban scale. So it would be great to hear from Zachary about the urban building energy modeling and the decision-making tools for utilities and cities. So Zachary.
Hello. Thank you very much. My name is Zach Rizzola. I'm coming from MIT. My talk today is I've titled "Developing Technology Pathways for Net Zero Cities," and the whole goal here is to use urban building energy modeling to help work on these goals. The lab is a diverse mix of students, and we study a whole bunch of different topics all around buildings. And so we and have actually been working on several different projects around reducing cooling demand in India as well. I won't talk about that, but I just wanted to put that as a context. And so the main question here is, how can building energy modeling tools address urban densification while working towards a net zero building stock by 2050, which is one of these goals that we're trying to meet if we're going to meet our Paris Agreement emissions reduction goals. And so I really like this slide. Nidhi did a great job setting us up, as well as why we need to be working on this. But around the globe, there's differing challenges in the built environment. In North America and Europe, it's a renovation challenge. Most of the existing buildings today will still exist in 2050. In India, and in Africa and other emerging economies, there's a huge need for building new net zero buildings. Because that's going to be, the building stock is going to double in the next 30 years. But there's still a renovation challenge as well. And our goal is to provide actionable and reliable information for cities to transform the building stocks. And UBEMs are the tool of choice for this work, at least in my opinion, and in our opinion in the lab. But just to give you a little bit of a background, what is an urban building energy model, an UBEM? First, we need to start at building energy modeling. For 30 years now, we've been figuring out how to get to net zero. And at this point, in most climates around the world, we have it figured out. Through some combination of insulation if you're in a cold climate, better equipment if you're in a hot climate, even a little bit of insulation as well in a hot climate, and then things like heat pumps and weather stripping, and then photovoltaics or other renewable sources, you can get an individual building to net zero pretty quickly, pretty efficiently, and cost effectively. However, how do we scale this? And that's really where urban building energy modeling comes in. So to give you a bit of a sense, what are the key pieces? Well, when we build an individual building energy model, we need weather data, we need geometry data about the building, what does it look like, and we need some other information that talks about how the building is built. What are the walls made up of? What are the windows like? What are the people? How many people are in that building? And we can use these same things to build an urban building energy model. And so this is one of the first models we built about 6 years ago now in Boston, Massachusetts, in the US. And it was a huge model with tens of thousands of buildings, and it allowed us to get these energy consumption data across the entire city without having to build models hand by hand for each individual building. And this was a big breakthrough, and really lets us go and start to answer these questions around the world at scale. And so just to kind of give you, again, a sense, what does it take to build this model? It's very similar to that individual building model, but you now need to describe it across a couple of different types of buildings in the city. And so we assign types. So think about, schools might be one. You might have an office building, a residential home, a store, a retail store. Those are the kind of, now instead of describing a single building, we describe buildings of that type. And we use that typology and define all these other information we used in a individual building model and define it for that typology, and then can expand that to and run the simulations across the entire area. And that's what gives us an urban building energy model. And so I want to walk you through a little bit how you get these key pieces of data because it's been a huge challenge. And in that original Boston study, it took a lot of time and effort to actually get all those people together. And if we want to scale this technology and be able to build models everywhere, we need everyone on board. And so these are the three key roles that we've identified that are necessary for building a model and getting it forward and making that fast. And so it requires a city representative, the sustainability champion, the person who's going to say, we have some emissions reduction goals, we're trying to get to net zero, and we're going to have this project to make it happen. Then you need somebody that understands the data about all the buildings, and they are able to work on the geometries of the buildings. And then beyond that, you need someone with an energy modeling experience, and they're going to be the ones that figure out what's in that wall, what is how good is that window, what is the cooling system being used. They're the one that understands the technology side of it. But they only need to understand how to do this at the individual building energy modeling level, and the tools we've built help you expand that very easily to the whole city. And so that person with the understanding of the data needs to get some footprint data for the area. And then they also need something about those use cases. Is it a school? And when was it built? Because that often helps define the construction. And so now we have the geometry data, which is great. Now we need to go and pull together all that information about how the building was built. And that energy modeler needs to identify all those different types that they want to look at. And they want to group them all together and understand what everything's going to be doing. And what we've done to help enable this whole process is built a tool called ubem.io, ubem.io. It's a website specifically designed to bring these three people together and help them bring this information in and build a model using these GIS shape files as the base print. And so the energy modeler is going to be working with these, with the website and some of these definitions of how the building is constructed to make this happen. And we're providing weather data on that website based on this international collection of weather data. So the next step is we need a simulation engine. We need something to actually run these models. And so that's where we've built this tool called UMI. It runs these simulations. And one of the things we're really happy and excited about is it runs it very fast for a whole city. I ran a model in a case study that I'll show you shortly of 13,000 buildings in about 5 hours, which is a huge improvement over an individual building model that might take a minute to run just itself. So you can imagine what that might take. It could take it could take 10,000 hours. It could take hundreds of hours to run it across 10,000 buildings. There are other tools out there as well that do this. But at the core, they're still UMI and several others are still using the Energy Plus, which is the standard, one of the standard simulation engines for individual building models. Okay, so now we have everything. We have weather, geometry, this information about how the building is constructed, and a simulation engine. We can get an urban building energy model. And so I want to share with you this. This is a kind of animation walking you through how that Boston model was built. We started out with the information about the kind of floor prints of the buildings, and then we extruded them up based on the height data that we gathered. And it's not going to work with me today. All right, we're going to go fast. The height data that we gathered. And then we're basically just breaking it down into the number of floors and putting a bunch of window area on it based on the information we gathered. And then we bring up all the other buildings around it as well using that same data source. And we can either simulate all those buildings, or they can be used, if we want to look at that single building, they can just be used to shade that building as information. And so the kind of 4 key pieces here that I wanted to highlight is we've identified 4 use cases for urban building energy modeling. The first is urban planning and new neighborhood design. Where there's a new development going on, you can use these tools to identify the best organization of those buildings, the best way to construct those buildings, and do it at scale by defining these few types of categories and replicating it around the whole area. And in UMI, we can look at the amount of daylight that's coming into a space. We can look at the amount of energy that's being used, and other amenities such as walkability and the life cycle carbon emissions. So that's the first use case. The second one is the one that I focused on a lot, which is the stock level carbon reduction strategies. If you're a city and you're trying to get to net zero, how do you actually get there? And I'll show you a case study of that in a moment to kind of illustrate the point. The third is building level recommendations. If you're going in and you're trying to provide individual recommendations to a homeowner, to an owner of an office park, you need the energy data for that building to make sure you have that model spot on. If you do have that data, you can also then go into this building to grid integration that was already touched upon, where you really understand down to the building level what the load profiles are looking like. And you can do that now across the entire city very quickly because you've built up these models of everywhere, of all the buildings. And so just to give you a quick case study here, this is Oshkosh, Wisconsin in the US. All you need to know is it's a small city, 60,000 people. So it really is quite small. And I know it's very different from pretty much any city in India, but the idea here is this is scalable. This is something that they would not have had the funds to do normally, to build a normal urban building energy model. We came in and I was able to build this model very quickly, about 10,000 buildings, very quickly for basically no money. And so this was one of these case studies to prove that we can scale this tool worldwide. And so the city of Oshkosh doesn't quite have a net zero target, but they won 85% emissions reduction by 2050 over their baseline. And they're in this place, like many other cities that have understand their baseline emissions, and they've set some reduction target, but they don't know how to get there. And so the whole goal here was to help them get there. And to get there, I developed these technology pathways, which is what we're calling a set of building-specific upgrades that are going to reduce carbon emissions by a given amount. And so you can see their baseline, that today dotted line. The energy efficiency upgrade that we proposed here involves some insulation for them and new appliances to be more energy efficient, better lighting, moving to all LED light bulbs, for example. And that was pretty good, but it really didn't even get them very far in terms of what the potential was across the entire building stock. And you can see here the building stock in Oshkosh broken down into those three different categories that we were looking at. We focused specifically on residential buildings. And so that was how we broke it up, and that's how the results were. And for working with the city of Oshkosh, they really wanted to know which buildings they should focus on. And so you can see here that their focus needs to be on these pre-1980s single-family homes. It's kind of a big sprawling city, and there's a lot of these homes, and that was where the majority of their emissions were coming from. The next step, adding in a heat pump for heat electrification and cooling, was a huge improvement over the existing gas system in terms of emissions, but it still didn't get them there. To get them to their goals, they needed to add PV. And so I did a simulation, and we found that 50% of their rooftop area would let them meet their 2050 85% reduction goal. And so that's the kind of things we can do now in this urban model. We know the whole building, we know all the energy consumption across all the buildings, and we also have all the geometry, so we can look at the solar potential across all those rooftops, run a quick simulation, and immediately know what do we need. And I was able to say, well, 100% is actually too much. They could almost get to net zero with 100% rooftop if they wanted to. It might have to be a little bit more than that, but that's in the realm of possibilities for them. And just to then take one step back, to prove out this whole workflow in ubam.io, last January, I ran a workshop with a few others in the lab with 8 cities around the world, and all of trying to address these questions. Invariably, it was either they had net zero goals or nearly net zero goals. And so we started with these small models and districts in each of the cities as exemplars, and working with city representatives in each of the communities as well as some students to do the energy modeling work, we were able to run these models and start to answer some of their questions. And so, for example, and then from there they were given back to the cities to scale. And so the city of Kiel in Germany actually now, their model is 40,000 buildings across the whole city taken over by a local partner. And they're starting to use that to answer questions around how their district heating system can help them get to their net zero goals. The city of Florianopolis in Brazil, this was the first time that they really started to understand, the city decision makers really started to understand just how much of an impact the loads from their appliances, so the heat being generated from their appliances inside the buildings, were affecting their cooling demands. And so they really realized that they needed to set policies and build programs to help their homeowners, their office building owners put in more efficient appliances, because that would greatly reduce their cooling demand. And that would help them, along with more efficient cooling technologies and some passive shading technologies that we were simulating as well, able to get them to their goals. And one of the biggest takeaways, though, from this whole effort was there's widely varying goals, interests, and climates around the world. I mean, none of that is a surprise, but it just further motivated the need to run these models in lots of places. We can't say, here's a one-size-fits-all strategy. We need to try lots of different options and tailor them to the individual needs of each community. And so that means tailoring how the buildings are defined for the communities, tailoring how what the upgrades are for the different communities. And what we found, especially, was that in almost all of these cities, the current ambitions for the technology pathways are insufficient to reach existing goals. Most of these cities had nearly net zero goals. And yet you can see from these same technology pathway graphs that I was showing you for Oshkosh, very few of them were getting there. And I also wanted to highlight one of the challenges too that we face is that with climate change, the climate is going to become more and more difficult, especially in cooling dominated climates. And so you can see in Braga in Portugal here, the first scenario we ran for them actually involved taking into account their 2050 climate, and that global warming that's going to happen means that their cooling demand is going to skyrocket. And so now all of a sudden, to meet their goals, they have to deal with that extra amount of cooling. And so that's just one further challenge in getting there. But we were able to forecast it, and now they have the information and the knowledge and the tools to try lots of different solutions to actually get there. And so my whole takeaway from the whole takeaway here is that we can leverage UBEMs to help guide net zero policy making. You now have, with these tools, you can pull together the right data to make informed decisions about how you should proceed, about what technologies, what programs, what policies can help guide each city or a state or kind of a whole country. If you really want to get to that level, you can be using that to help guide you forward to your goals. And so that's one of the things we're really proud of with this work is it's open to everyone. You can go to ubem.io right now, if you have that GIS data, you can start to build it. There's a little bit more to it. So if there's folks that are very interested, feel free to reach out to me at zbz@mit.edu. Thank you very much.